The year is 1987. Friday the 13th has been established as a franchise for 7 years and A Nightmare on Elm Street for just 3 years. But nevertheless, their respective primary antagonists, Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger, have gained their own fan bases of such magnitude that the two supervillains were entered into the schoolyard question of who would win in a fight. Funnily enough, the producers of the two franchises were wondering that question themselves, and driven by the huge dollar signs that represented the massive box office revenue that movie would create, they set about trying to make it happen. However, there's one thing that's more powerful than Freddy and Jason combined, and that's lawyers. At the time, the two were under separate production companies, Jason with Paramount and Freddy under New Line Cinema. Before the two could battle it out on screen, negotiations would need to take place between the two studios, and it was decided that neither party could agree on a story that was strong enough to support the two unstoppable killers. Fast forward 2 years to 1989. Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan is released and is a spectacular flop both financially and critically. Around that time, Sean Cunningham, who produced and directed the first Friday the 13th film, decided to try and give Freddy vs. Jason another go after the rights were reverted to Phil Scuderi, Stephen Manassian and Robert Balsamianto, who in turn sold them to New Line Cinema. Now Freddy and Jason are living under the same roof, but this was an unfortunate time.
You know, I was away from Friday the 13th for several years because they were making the same movie over and over again, and I had been associated with it, but I had moved on to do other things. The whole reason to come back was I wanted to do Freddy versus Jason. I thought that was going to be so cool. And it was a way to sort of breathe life into it. As it turned out, I was able to get the rights back from Paramount and Warner Brothers and set something up at New Line, but we had to wait for a long time before we could do Freddy versus Jason, and that's when we wound up doing Friday the 13th Part 9.
Paramount kept the rights to Friday the 13th. The other partners had Jason Voorhees.
Wes Craven returned to New Line to make a new Nightmare, which was a huge success for the Nightmare franchise. This gave Cunningham the chance to make Final Friday, which was an unusual one even by Friday the 13th standards. Not compared to Jason X, which was another intermediary film whilst everyone was waiting for Freddy vs. Jason to get the green light, and it was hilarious. Although some, dare I say, fun came out of the in-between films, especially from the Friday franchise, they were generally considered by most to be both the weirdest and the worst. Because Freddy vs. Jason was such a highly anticipated film and was in the making for over 15 years, careful consideration was taken as to who would write the script. After a lot of different combinations and writers, they settled on a relatively unknown writing duo, Mark Swift and Damian Shannon. The two would later go on to write the Friday the 13th reboot, which I'm sure I'm on record as saying is the one reboot that I hate the least. This is the plot that befell the long-awaited installment for two of the biggest horror franchises. Freddy Krueger is stuck in the dream world, but his antics have no effect since all mention of him, his victims and his previous visits are banned. You see, Freddy's power comes from people's fear of him, and if no one knows that he ever existed, then no one can fear him and he can't come back. To start the fear train rolling again, Freddy resurrects Jason Voorhees and sends him to 1428 Elm Street to kill a teen or two, so the rumour mill about Freddy's past will flow and people will start being afraid of him again. This plan works like a dream, but there's one problem. Once Freddy is back at full power, Jason won't stop killing, and there isn't enough room for two overpowered supernatural psychos, so the two must throw down so the winner can have their pick of the drunk, horny teenagers. Before I carry on with the narration that I recorded a few weeks ago, as I'm putting this video together, a thought occurred to me. It may just be because I'm being terribly British, but I was appalled at the scene where Gib and Trey have sex upstairs. I know it's just an excuse to separate them so one of them can be picked off, and it wasn't the fact that they were having sex, because sex and death walk hand in hand in any Jason-related film, but more the fact that they're doing it in someone else's house. This is not your property, and you're just banging each other in someone else's bed. What were they going to do after they got dressed? Launder the sheets, I'd hope. The fact that the sheets will eventually need laundering for a different reason is besides the point. They didn't even ask for permission. Why is Laurie fine with this? The only objection Laurie raises with Gib about this issue is that she's doing it with Trey. Not why they're doing it at all, in her house.
What do you see in him? I don't know. But he has a cute ass.
Babe, make me ask you twice, okay?
Personally, I don't think this film should ever have been attempted. It was such a huge concept and the fans were so hyped about it for so long that whatever was produced would never live up to the massive expectations that had been placed on it for that length of time. There was a time for this film, and it went. The 90s was notorious for being the death of horror, and specifically the slasher genre, until Scream revived it, albeit temporarily. First off, what should have been discussed was what this film was going to mean for both the franchises. We know ahead of time that Freddy vs. Jason was the final film in both franchises until both of their respective reboots, but what was the intention? When you write something like Freddy vs. Jason, you have to ask yourself, who will win? Can there be a winner? Will they both die or survive? We know that dying is something that these two don't know how to do, so what are we doing here? Making money? Most definitely, but it was obvious from the get-go that this film wasn't going to greatly impact either franchise, and that could have been their first mistake. The second mistake was not having any other character from either franchise except Freddy and Jason. You can make the argument that adding in other recognisable faces would distract from the Freddy and Jason aspect, but the film follows a whole new set of characters that we've never seen before, and their actions significantly impact the plot, and indeed the outcome. Laurie is the main character and current resident of 1428 Elm Street. She and her father have been bereaved with the death of her mother and his wife, so one rainy night, Laurie's friends, Kia and Gib, come over to cheer her up. They also invite Gibbs' boyfriend Trey and his friend Blake as a potential date for Laurie. However, Laurie's not interested because she's still pining for her first love, Will, who left town and never contacted her ever again. Actually, Will and his friend Mark are being kept in Western Hills Psychiatric Hospital, of which Laurie's father is a consultant. Mark is there because his brother was killed by Freddy, and Will was sent there by Laurie's father because Will thinks that he killed Laurie's mother. The two are given a drug called Hypnosil, which suppresses dreams. Fucking hell, if they don't want the populace to dream and risk Freddy's return, then they should be pumping this stuff into the fucking water supply. The point is that although these characters are linked to Freddy in some way, we've never seen them before, and therefore the audience have no connection to them. Having main characters that haven't been in any previous films before would help the people who don't know anything about either franchise's histories, but honestly, who's going to see a film called Freddy vs. Jason who hasn't seen at least one of each film? I think it would have helped the plot to have a few previous protagonists, or at least one from each franchise, return, and see that neither of their demons win the fight. Another thing that was mishandled was the casting of Jason. This is a sore point for a lot of Jason fans because we all know that Kane Hodder played Jason for 4 Friday films and is generally considered to be the best of the bunch, so when Freddy vs. Jason came along, Hodder was approached for the role. Sean Cunningham and everyone else thought it was a great idea since Hodder had a massive fan base of his own who liked his portrayal of Jason, so it looked like a done deal. Although I'd initially thought it was the director Ronnie Yu's decision to replace Hodder with Ken Kurtzinger, turns out I was wrong.
In that fanboy base, there was a dispute as to whether or not Kane Hodder was going to be as good as some other Jason might be, and frankly, I never thought of anybody else playing the part.
Got the script, then the director was hired, and things started changing, and I wasn't sure why.
Before I'm on board, already the studio decided that they want a new Jason.
The decision not to use Kane Hodder really had nothing to do with Ronnie. Ronnie said from day one, if you guys want Kane Hodder, I don't care. But one of the executives at New Line said, no, let's go a different way. And I think New Line, when they decided to make this movie, decided they wanted to do something different. And different just didn't mean Kane Hodder, it meant everything.
I says, fine, this is their call, and I'm fine with it.
Of course, this casting decision was devastating for Hodder and a lot of fans who wanted him to return for the ultimate showdown. It's not really said why Freddy chose Jason to do his bidding, or even why he lost control, or why he needed Jason in the first place. If Freddy had enough power to bring Jason back to life, then why did he not have enough power to kill people in their dreams? Jason seems like a bit of an odd choice, and the decision is made off-screen. It's a bit of a hand-wavy plot point to show how and why Jason is killing people for Freddy. All of this is before the opening credits. In a bizarre turn in the plot, Jason is made out to be the good guy. Despite him having the highest body count of all horror movie villains at the time, Jason is supposed to be the one we want to win. You could make the argument that Jason is more of an anti-hero than a straight villain, since he was bullied as a child and his death was caused by negligence of his well-being by camp counselors, whereas Freddy is pure evil. I find it mystifying how these teams seem to think that they can stop Freddy and Jason even though they have no power whatsoever, and also there's nothing keeping them there. We know that Freddy can't go beyond Springwood, and once Jason has either finished killing everyone or just gets bored, then he'll return to Crystal Lake anyway, so what is it stopping them from leaving town? All the other characters in the two franchises have been trapped with their respective villains in some way with no choice but to face them, but that's not the case here. Just leave. Nope, instead they decide to get involved and take an unconscious Jason to Crystal Lake, pull Freddy into the real world because we've never seen that before, so the two can have their fight. Sure, Freddy did kill Laurie's mother, but she doesn't find that out until the end when she goes into the dream world to retrieve Freddy. If she didn't embark on this insanely dangerous mission with no valid motivation beforehand, then she'd never have known. As far as she's concerned, her mother died in a car accident.
Did Mom die in a car accident?
Yes, of course she did.
By the way, Freddy killing Laurie's mother is the only valid motivation given to any of these characters. Will is drawn in by accident, and apart from Freddy and Jason killing a lot of their friends, the characters who are alive by the end have very little motivation to stick around. Although I have a few negative points about this film, the actual Freddy vs Jason part was good, but even with that we must return to the question I posed before. Who will win? The answer? Neither of them. Freddy gets his glove arm ripped off and then stabbed through the back with it by Jason, and then Freddy's decapitated by Laurie with Jason's machete as revenge for killing her friends and also her mother, whilst Jason seemingly dies in the lake from the injuries sustained during the battle. Of course, at the end, Jason rises from the lake holding Freddy's severed head, and in the last moments, Freddy gives us a little wink to camera to show that he's still around. It kind of had to be that way. The producers knew that if they showed either one to be victorious, then it would alienate at least one fanbase. The outcome was clever because both parties can be satisfied, or at least make the argument, that their guy won.
Who won, Jason or Freddy?
It's fair to say it's a draw, ultimately.
They both sort of won.
I think that if you were a fan of Jason, you definitely thought he won. If you were a fan of Freddy, you thought he won. And that really, to me, is actually the perfect ending.
Freddy's winking at the end there, so, you know, he's still clicking.
Well, in my mind, not necessarily in other people's mind, I think it's Freddy. I think it's Freddy.
After a big marketing campaign complete with a Vegas-style pre-fight weigh-in, Freddy vs Jason was the highest grossing of both franchises at the time, taking in a total box office revenue of $116.6 million against a $30 million budget. Most critics were less than generous towards the film, but the fans seemed to enjoy it. As for me, I felt that Robert Englund was the best part of the film, and it would be his last cinematic outing as Freddy Krueger. Naturally, after the financial success of the movie, the question was asked about doing Freddy vs Jason vs Ash.
The rumor of Jason versus Freddy versus Ash is currently a pretty hot one. That one's buzzing around the internet. It's tearing it up on the internet. And that rumor, I have to say, is partially true. But you got to look at it this way. There's 3 franchises. So you got 3 batches of lawyers going, so right now they're sort of yelling at each other. Going, no, we're worth more. No, you suck. We're better. We're the better franchise. I guess I could just say this. They're in discussions right now.
It's a shame really, because that would have been fun.